California Mayor Larry Agron, former California Governor Jerry Brown, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, U.S. Senator John Kerry of Nebraska, and former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas. Questions were directed to the candidates by 4 sitting Democratic mayors. They are Raymond Flynn of Boston, Maynard Jackson of Atlanta, Maureen O'Connor of San Diego, and Michael White of Cleveland. We now bring you our coverage of last night's event.
Good evening, and welcome to the Democratic Presidential Forum of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm Barbara Reynolds. I'm a columnist with USA Today. This evening, I will be your moderator, and I understand that's just a fancy word for the traffic cop to keep the issues moving. We're pleased to have 5 of the candidates for President of the United States here this evening to share with us their vision for the future of America's cities. We're pleased that these distinguished political leaders have accepted the invitation extended by the Conference of Mayors President, Boston Mayor Raymond Flynn. At this time, Mayor Flynn, will you please say a few words about the forum? Mayor Flynn.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to C-SPAN for helping us get our message to the candidates, and the candidates get their message to the American people as to how they would deal with American cities when they become presidents of the United States. The Conference of Mayors invited each of the candidates for president, both Democrats and Republicans, to this conference. All have accepted our invitation, with the exception of President George Bush. The invitation is still open, Mr. President, and we'll be here tomorrow and Friday. And we're all anxious, Democrats and Republicans are anxious for you to tell us how you're going to get America back to work, revitalize our cities, deal with our stagnant economy, and rebuild our neighborhoods and our families. Our task tonight is very, very clear, and we're going to be a bit aggressive in that regard. We need to make sure that the people of our cities understand specifically how the candidates for president feel on some of the critical issues, specifically around the economy, the anti-recession proposal. Number 2, the issue of homelessness that is plaguing our cities and our country. Number 3, the issue of education and tuition that's out of reach of our young people. And 4, how we're going to deal with the violence, specifically in the area of so many people that are in our city tonight that are looking for treatment, rehabilitation, who have drug dependency. So those are the critical issues that we need to get specific answers. And Barbara will be very disappointed if you're not able to get specific answers from these wonderful people here tonight.
I'll do my best. As Mayor Flynn has already said, for far too long, America's cities have been the ugly ducklings of the presidential campaigns. 4 years ago, the cities, their promise and their peril were hardly mentioned by the candidates for president. It seemed that urban issues were too much bad news, and candidates did not have the courage to address them. Well, it is often said that you can run, but you can't hide. The mayors believe that the cities, large and small, are all of us, and they offer the real key to solving the problems of all Americans. If our cities are not healthy and are not prosperous, our nation cannot be healthy and prosperous either. Tonight, we'll hear about what needs to be done in America's cities and what will be done if any of these distinguished candidates becomes President of the United States. With us this evening are Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas, Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, former California Governor Jerry Brown, former Irvine, California Mayor Larry Agron. With us to discuss the cities with these candidates is a panel of mayors. They individually represent some of the great cities of this nation. They collectively represent the organization sponsoring this forum, the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Posing the questions tonight, we have Conference President Flynn. We have Mayor Maynard Jackson of Atlanta. He's a conference trustee and chair of the Rebuild America Coalition, and Mayor Maureen O'Connor of San Diego. She's co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force on Drug Control, and Mayor Michael White of Cleveland, chair of the Mayor's Committee on Health. And now the ground rules. We will begin this evening by asking each of the candidates to make a brief opening statement on our topic, the future of America's cities. We ask each candidate to limit this opening statement to 4 minutes to allow plenty of time for questions and discussions as the forum proceeds. Following the opening statements, I will ask each of the mayors in turn to pose a question to one of the candidates, and that candidate will be asked to respond to the questions in 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay? Again, we will ask each candidate to limit his response so that we can cover as many different questions and issues as possible. I'd like to get our forum underway this evening by asking Governor Clinton to make the first opening statement.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and especially thank you, Mayor Flynn, Mayor Jackson, Mayor O'Connor, and Mayor White. And I want to thank all of you who are here, who work in cities that I've already had the opportunity to visit, and particularly the mayors here who have taken the time to show me some of the things that they are doing that are working, to share ideas with me, and to help me try to shape an urban policy for the 90s. The two great questions that I think we face in this election can be seen in stark relief in all the cities of America. Can we go on for 4 more years with no national strategy to revitalize the economy, to restore the middle class, to reduce poverty, to increase real growth? We're the only nation without such a strategy. The cities, the states are left in the dust. Can we go on for 4 more years with a country that's coming apart when it needs desperately to be coming together? In every city I visit, there is a fresh story of some child's heartbreak. For 10 years, we have seen an administration that says the president has no responsibility for the health of the cities, or the states, I might add, and that all the real problems of America should be taken care of by us at the state and local level and by the 1,000 points of light. In a way, a lot of us have tried to be those points of light, and you have done remarkable things against all the odds with no help. And I think we ought to put that on the table first. We are doing more with less at the state and local level. We have done what we have been asked to do, and yet there is nowhere near the kind of partnership we need with the national government. Let me, in the time allotted to me, just mention 3 or 4 specific areas where I believe the next president should establish a vigorous partnership with our cities. First, in the area of economic development, we need a genuine housing program, one that attacks the problems of homelessness, all three problems: those people who've been deinstitutionalized, who don't have community-based support settings, those people who have alcohol and drug abuse problems, who don't have adequate residential treatment, and those people who are just flat out poor, who've fallen beneath the safety net, who need a decent public housing program. I don't favor a big new bureaucracy. I want to do more incentives for home ownership and more direct grants through cities and community nonprofits at the city level. The second thing I'd like to say is we need a network of development banks in this country. President Carter tried to develop one right at the end of his term, modeled on the South Shore Development Bank in Chicago, a proven system for bringing enterprise, opportunity, and empowerment into the inner city. If we had a banking system in this country that thought that poor people and minorities could generate jobs and opportunities, we could do it. I have seen it happen in Chicago. I have seen it happen in Arkansas, where my wife serves on the board of the counterpart to the South Shore Development Bank in Chicago in our state. We need to bring enterprise to the inner city, and we can do it. In the area of education, we should fully fund Head Start, establish a national apprenticeship system, make college education accessible to all through a trust fund of borrowing which can be paid back either at low interest rates over a long period of time or with 2 years of service to our country. Think of all the social problems in the cities you could attack if everybody, Mayor, with a college degree from Cleveland came back and gave you 2 years as a teacher or a police officer or a healthcare worker. Finally, I agree with what Mayor Flynn says. We have to have drug treatment on demand in this country and alternative disposition for youthful offenders. We need more community-based boot camps, discipline, treatment, education, community service work. And lastly, I would say in the area of health, we need more community-based health clinics, and we need more health-based services in the schools if we want to attack the problems at the roots. With regard to the disintegration of the social fabric, the crime and the violence, I would suggest that we have to find ways to establish personal contacts with young people in trouble or at risk of getting in trouble with caring, successful adults. And I would lead a partnership, including putting up with some money, to help revolutionize the intersection of the community and the schools so that children who are now getting in trouble can imagine and can lead an alternative life. These are the things we ought to be for: opportunity, security, a decent future, and a real partnership. Ask the mayors in my home state. They'll tell you I've been there on the firing line for a long time, and if you'll elect me president, I'll be there with you. Thank you very much.
Senator Tsongas.
Thank you very much. I think, as Governor Clinton pointed out, that Ronald Reagan and George Bush made a decision. And the decision was that there are no votes in the cities for them, so they simply cut them off. A very cynical decision that has a long-term impact, and you end up with a nation divided. That is a bitter legacy, and all of us deal with it. I think to be a president who's a friend of cities, there are really three requirements, and let me go through them. One, you have to care. Not the way George Bush cares about New Hampshire, but care. I care not because you're here, but because I grew up in the city. Lowell, Massachusetts. No city in America hurt more in the 40s and 50s and 60s when I was growing up than my home city. We lost textiles, and for decades the people of my city knew pain. Mayor, your city as well. A lot of cities in the Northeast. And as a city councilor, as a congressman, and as a senator, I've worked very hard to bring that city back. I know something about sliding down a decline of a city, and I work to bring it back. And today, as a citizen of that city, I'm a kind of mourner about the stagnation that has happened and all that we did to bring that city back, coming to a stagnant gridlock. And the hope is no longer there. When I leave the White House, I'm going to go back and live in Lowell like I do now. So my caring is not only the cities of this country, but the city I care about more than anything else. And those of you who know me in my past know my passion for that issue. The second is to have to be a Democrat who's committed to put money into the cities. Money. Real money. Not for the B-2 bomber, not for troops in Europe, not for Star Wars, but for the people who are fellow citizens hurting in the cities. All of us are committed to that. And Bill gave you a list of the kinds of things that we're going to look at and that all of us have been committed to. Head Start, drug treatment, infrastructure, those kinds of things. No matter which of us is elected president, you're going to be a lot better off than you are today. That's easy. But let me focus on one particular point of view. The way we brought Lowell, Massachusetts back was not just government programs. We brought it back because we brought in private money. There's not enough federal money in the world. There are not enough printing presses in this country to solve the problems of the cities with public money. You have to get private money to flow into the cities to bring them back. Now let me give you an example. You know, the mayor and I were at St. Francis House in Boston, and we were talking to some of the residents there, and we asked them, the mayor asked them, what can we give you? And they said, jobs. Jobs. The answer in the cities is the private sector providing private sector jobs so that people have the dignity of that kind of work. All the public works programs are fine and they're important, but you build the road, and at the end of the road, there better be a factory hiring people at high wages, employing them. Let me tell you what kind of a company won't locate in the city. A company going bankrupt. A company laying off people. A company not growing. Or a company that is growing but goes to the suburb. There are two basic requirements for cities in terms of the future. Expand the economy. I hope you take a look at this. No tax cuts for the middle class, but you expand the private sector, the manufacturing base, so the engine runs. And secondly, incentives for companies to locate in the city. The economy must expand,
Senator.
and those people must locate in the city. Otherwise, I've got a great finishing line. Can I use it? Otherwise, you are simply waiting for Godot.
Senator Kerry.
Well, first of all, let me recognize the mayor of my hometown, Mike Johans, who's sitting out here in the audience. I was fortunate in my life to grow up in a city that was led by people who did have a vision of what they wanted their city to be, and they fought to preserve, in particular, the neighborhood that I grew up in. I must confess that though I'm from the state of Nebraska, originally from the city of Lincoln, it is my neighborhood with which I identify. It is my neighborhood that I find real rapport. And it is, in my strong judgment, the neighborhood that will determine whether or not the cities themselves are capable of surviving and prospering. I've read over the last couple of weeks bits and pieces of a book that Martin Luther King wrote in 1967, where he tried to lay out an answer to the question, what do we do now? I regret to look back on the past 25 years and feel, particularly for those who have grown even more desperate in the ranks of poverty, that we have made very little progress indeed. It is fair to say and tragic to say that we have lost ground. But Martin Luther King said above all other things that procrastination is the thief of time, that one must come to the task with an urgency, that understands that lives are at stake. He said, the tide in the affairs of men do not remain at the flood, they ebb. We may cry out desperately for time to slow in her progress, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. And that over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the words, too late. It seems to me above all of the things we must come to the task of solving the problems of our cities with an urgency that says if a single life is at stake, we should respond. Not with a task force, not with a study, not with a plan, but with action now. Lives are at stake in this city and in practically every other city in this nation. Now, I have declared 3 priorities for which I intend to fight, not just only in this campaign, but as President of the United States, because I believe it will save lives. The first of these is national health insurance. Establishing health care as a right for all Americans, it will bring billions of dollars into our cities. It says simply that health care is a responsibility of the federal government and state governments, and that upon property taxes, we should not depend to care for this nation's indigent. It will convert the problem of AIDS into a national problem, not a local problem, but a national problem that can be addressed by the entire nation. Secondly, I intend to fight for a national industrial policy that focuses on 2 rather simple and fundamental things, and that is, if American workers have the tools, and we have not been investing in plant and equipment in this country to keep pace, and if American workers have the skills, and we have not been investing to provide them with the skills, if American workers have those 2 things, they can compete with anybody on this earth, and if they do not, we will continue to move in the direction of lower wages. Third, I intend to fight for radical restructuring of our federal government. Our federal policies are creating jobs in Washington, D.C. alone. And I intend to reorganize this government so that it can, in fact, work at the community level to solving our problems. There are 3 commitments that I make to you if you will support me and if I become the next president. First, I will be a full partner with the cities. And by partner, I mean partner. Not one party bringing goodwill and good wishes, but both parties bringing cash to the proposition. Secondly, in my first week, I will call the mayors into the White House, and we will build an action agenda for the urban environment. I've laid out the details of an outline of what that agenda should focus on. It will focus on infrastructure and the need, again, to have a partnership in infrastructure. It will focus, secondly, on public safety. There's almost no city in America that cannot say that it is less safe today than it was 10 years ago. Thirdly, I will focus on children in that agenda, and fourthly, on housing, where we have tragically decreased our commitment. Third, my commitment to you is that if there is a federal mandate for our cities, I will make sure there's cash that backs up that mandate so that you do not get stuck with the bill of having to pay for things that we require. It is my fondest desire as an American that the Americans of the year 2050 will look back upon the United States of America in the 1990s and say, not that we sought to get reelected, but that we were bold, that we had courage, that we were strong, that we felt a sense of urgency, respond compassionately and with strength to those who needed our help. That above all of the things, we looked in the future and committed ourselves to building that better future. I promise you, as President of the United States, I will work with higher regard for posterity than I have for popularity, and greater concern for the next generation
Thank you,
than
Senator.
I have for the next election.
Thank you. Governor Brown. Governor Brown.
Thank you. I have to tell you a little bit about myself. You've heard a lot. Yeah, you can laugh. You've heard about Governor Moonbeam. You've heard that, haven't you? About the flake. Well, during my 8 years as governor of California, we created 1 out of every 4 American jobs. We cut taxes, and we gave billions and billions of dollars to local government. As I saved that money. Frugality, vetoing billions of dollars of unnecessary legislation, so that when a tax revolt came along to reduce property taxes, we had the money to give back to local cities and districts to maintain those local services. We even had an urban strategy. That was the big thing 10 years ago, urban strategies. We've got one. Anybody wants one? I'll send you a copy. We got a conservation corps. Now 25 cities have the same thing. We started in California. 50,000 young men and women went through that conservation corps, earned money, got their high school diploma, got a sense of citizenship and self-esteem, and it's real. It's $60 million a year. That's what's happening out there, which in California, which is the 8th largest economy in the world. So when people look around for What's the reality? Where's the beef? Where's the experience? I want you to take a look at that. And you're going to hear a lot of talk, but the real question here is, what's going on here in Washington? What's going on in this country? I pulled out the booklet you have here, Does America Need Cities? You look on page 35 and you find out that 60% of the American people in the last 20 years have lost income, have gone downhill. Now, why is that? What's going on here? We're not a poor country. That budget deficit is not the big bugaboo. It didn't stop bailing out the banks. It didn't stop the Gulf War. It doesn't stop the midnight pay raises. If you had $100,000 a year income every year, and you had a $50,000 mortgage in your home and that was your only debt, you'd feel pretty good. That's America. We have a $3 trillion mortgage and a $6 trillion income every year. We've got the money, but we don't have the political will. Those 60% of the American people that are on this page 35 who've gone downhill, they either don't vote, they don't give $1,000, they don't have the power. And what we're looking at here is not a lack of programs. Look in the back of the book, you have a few hundred of them. You can go over to the National Governors Association and the Mayor's Conference office. You can get all the plans you want. But that's not going to solve one thing until we can shift power back to those 60% of the people who don't have power, who don't have PACs, who don't have lobbyists to walk the hallways over there. I don't care which party's there. If we can't return power to the powerless and represent the unrepresented, then we are a tingling gong and an empty sound that signifies nothing. My campaign is about empowering the grassroots. It's not about getting along and going along. It's about confronting a corrupt status quo that no longer serves the American people. The cities of this nation are our future. Kids are dying. The biggest cause of death in New York City for black kids under 4 and Hispanic kids is AIDS. How'd they get it? Her mother was an IV drug user or a prostitute. She didn't come from Beverly Hills. She didn't come from Park Avenue. She came from political and economic neglect. That's a question of power. Unless we can take that power back, unless we can find a way to mobilize that untapped potential, then everything we say here is just another evening. We can go out and have a nice drink and a cocktail and carry on the gravy train. We've got to upset this apple cart. We've got to open up this country, and we have to live up to the promise. And the promise of this country is that we all have inalienable rights. And we have the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And there are kids in this country that are being exiled in their own land. Millions of them, and families in the urban areas, and you are on the front lines. You're the bulwark here of democracy. You're right there. It only takes $1 to get down to City Hall. When you're a senator or a governor, it's a little harder to get to you. So I respect what you're doing, and I want to work with you. But working with you is not just getting some nice TV ads and winning your votes and pleasing the Washington media and their establishment allies. That's not going to do it. And another Democratic president's not going to do it, and another 4 years of Bush certainly won't do it. It's going to take each of you and all of us to reclaim the promise of this country and mobilize this nation. That's the stakes here. We're talking about America.
Can you wrap it up, Governor?
I can wrap it up by just saying we're on the threshold of a golden age. We've got the money. All we have to do is find the political will to realize it and make sure that every single person in this country really has that American dream. Thank you.
Mayor Agron.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again with you and among you as a former mayor. I want to assure those mayors in the audience that there is life after mayor, that there is something useful to do after having served your own community as I served mine. Shortly after I got into this presidential race in August, Maynard Jackson, the mayor of Atlanta, was on Meet the Press, and he said he thought that the next president of the United States ought to be someone who's had governing experience as the mayor of an American city. And I thought that was a pretty good idea then, Mayor Jackson, and I still think it's a good idea. Because we bring, thank you, and if you're clapping for Ray Flynn or some of the other highly qualified mayors, that's all right too. Because we have a unique perspective to bring to bear to national politics. We have an important perspective. I know all the candidates now are coming out with books, and I've got my own official statements. Paul, I want to tell you, I'm probably one of the few people in America who has actually read your book cover to cover. I did it in one night without falling asleep, and it has a great many fine ideas for America. But we wrote our own book. Right here, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we wrote our own book in 1987 and 1988. I authored a national priorities resolution which suggested that it was time to cut the military budget by 10%. $30 billion. We passed that resolution. I spoke with Mayor Harold Washington. I was probably the last mayor to talk with him before he passed away. He agreed to put $20,000 into the study. I got my city to put $5,000 in. We got some other cities to participate. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors put together this study that pointed out that if we were to cut the military budget and shift its spending to America's cities, that we would regenerate America's cities with health care, with housing, with transportation improvements, with all manner of public services. And on top of it, the net addition of jobs would be 195,000. I tell you, if Michael Dukakis had run on this platform in 1988, he would be president today. What we need is the first Cold War, post-Cold War president in the United States of America. We need a candidate who has a post-Cold War vision. And in my candidacy, I try to bring that to the American people. Here in 1992, with the Berlin Wall down, with the Cold War behind us, we have an opportunity to cut the military budget not by 10%, but by 50%. And not in 10 years, but immediately. We ought to do this in 3 specific ways. Bring home our troops from Europe and Japan and do that right now. We're spending $200 billion a year on the defense of Western Europe and Japan against an enemy that no longer exists. We need to cancel the B-2 bomber, the MX missile deployment system, and Star Wars and convert those contracts to contracts for rapid transit, for energy-efficient heating and cooling systems, for fixing our infrastructure in our cities, for putting people to work by the millions. We need to also cancel foreign military aid and altogether bring home to the American people a peace dividend of $150 billion, the first $25 billion of which earmarked for direct aid to cities and towns in the United States of America. $100 per resident per year, the same as the old general revenue sharing program. No strings attached, no corruption, sending the money to the localities and let them decide what needs to be done first. The next $15 billion ought to be earmarked for direct assistance to public school districts, $375 per student per year. Get the money to the school districts, they'll educate our kids. Third, national health insurance. I like Senator Kerry's plan. I like Senator Tsongas's plan, but it's going to cost money. There needs to be $40 billion at least for a down payment on national health insurance to make it meaningful. Next, we have to bring home $20 billion out of this peace dividend for stepped-up environmental protection, cleaning up our toxic and nuclear waste sites, reforesting the earth, cleaning up our water, our air. That's going to cost real money, and the money's got to be there in the cities and towns. And finally, all of this leaves $50 billion out of this massive peace dividend. $50 billion that ought to be earmarked for 2 final purposes. One, some honest deficit reduction in this country. Not smoke and mirrors, but honest deficit reduction. And 2, the kind of national economic conversion planning that has as its centerpiece what I call a defense workers' bill of rights. Now that the Cold War is over, we want to harness the scientists, the engineers who previously had been employed building weapons of mass destruction to the tasks of building modern transit systems, energy-efficient heating and cooling systems, and rebuilding our American cities. There you have it, a plan for America, a specific plan that ought to be at the heart of the debate in 1992.
Thank you, Mayor. Ron Brown, don't leave. I want to recognize Chairman Ron Brown.
Brad is up there talking about babies with AIDS, and he doesn't even have a plan to end the crisis. You all are going to have blood on your hands if you don't do something about the AIDS crisis. All my friends are dead. I am sick and tired of silence on this crisis. You
Okay, you made your statement. Thank you.
I'm not leaving.
Why don't you go ahead?
I'm not either.
It's fine. I'll sit here. They have been silent on AIDS the whole campaign.
I don't
and
think
it's the
that's
biggest
right.
crisis in this
You want to talk about AIDS?
Wait, could I answer that question, please? Because I want you to know something. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has been in the forefront on providing money for the Ryan White proposal. We have spent countless hours in Senator Kennedy's office and other members of the Senate and the House of Representatives fighting for people living with AIDS. And we will continue to keep that fight going. We appreciate the fact that you're here, but we are on your side, and that's what we're doing here tonight. We're trying to get our next president to be on the side of the American people.
Each of the mayors are going to ask questions of the presidential candidates, and that question may come up in one of the questions, but I would like to get on with the program. I'd like for Chairman Ron Brown to stand. And of course, I'd feel very remiss if I didn't recognize a great leader, a great mayor, Mayor Sharon Pratt Kelly of the District of Columbia. I now would like to turn to Mayor Flynn for our first question of the evening.
There are a number of critical issues of affecting America's cities, but the one that I hear most, not only from my colleagues, mayors across the country, but my constituents as well. And I mentioned to a fellow the other day, I told him I was coming to Washington. We were going to have the opportunity to talk to the candidates for president. I said, what would you ask them if you were me? Ray, ask them specifically, what plan do they have to get my brother and my son back to work? One is a laborer, the other one works for a utility company. They've been laid off. What specifically would you do as President of the United States to get Americans back to work? And would you support the so-called Sarbanes proposal that would invest $35 billion into the American economy in public works projects, education, and safety? And what are the elements of a proposal that you would support to get Americans back to work? Governor Clinton?
First of all, let me say, in defense of all the candidates here, I think that in each in our own way, we've all tried to address this AIDS issue. And I think it is a very major thing, but just because George Bush doesn't talk about it doesn't mean that we don't. And I think it is important. Secondly, I don't know that I can support the Sarbanes proposal because I'm not absolutely sure that we've got it paid for and because it's a one-shot thing. But let me tell you some of the things I would do, which would generate a lot of money for new jobs. First of all, you have already paid for a 6-year highway program. It's in the gas tax that broke the Read My Lips pledge. By executive order, the president could accelerate the funding so that all the funding in the first year could be spent in the first 6 months. I think the Congress should break the budget proposal and say we're going to spend this 6 years worth of money in 3 years. We're going to double up every year. That would create directly and indirectly another 200,000 jobs a year in America for 3 years. Secondly, I think there should be a clear extension of the low-income housing credit. I think we should restore the historic preservation housing credit, and I think we should put some money back into housing in this country and do it in a hurry, targeted toward the cities where we need the investment. Thirdly, I think the FHA should guarantee 90% of the price of a median income family. That would help people to get back into housing. I'm not against some more one-shot delivery. I think we ought to look at the trust funds and water and sewer and other things that would put infrastructure, environmentally related investments back to the cities. And I wouldn't rule out a direct one-shot aid. I just don't want to commit to the Sarbanes proposal until I know that we have a way to pay for it and the money's going to be there. But I do think we need a real one-shot stimulus to put people to work in public works in this country. I think also that's something that could be done with a lot of these bases that have been closed. We could use servicemen and women that are coming home to work with and supervise chronically unemployed people to work out of those bases, give them education and training, and do public service work. And I'd like to see that funded on a longer-term basis than just a one-year, one-shot thing. Thank you very much.
Mayor Jackson will pose the next question to Senator Tsongas.
To Senator Tsongas, the Rebuild America Coalition of 54 national public and private organizations, which I serve as chairman in behalf of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, has proved that one of the chief reasons the United States has lost its competitive edge in world markets is the deterioration of our infrastructure. In infrastructure investment, Japan is number 1, America is number 55. Time has run out. How would you, Senator Tsongas, reverse the deterioration of the infrastructure so that America can regain that competitive edge by the end of this century?
Mr. Mayor, let me make 2 points if I can. One is that if you look at infrastructure and GNP, they track exactly. Countries that invest in infrastructure have a strong economy, a strong GNP. This is not foolishness, this is economics. And I think we are all committed to it. My commitment is quite real. I'm the only candidate who is committed to a 3 to 5 cent gasoline tax every year for investment in infrastructure, mass transit, that kind of thing. If you're going to call for it, you better pay for it. And calling for a gasoline tax, it's not easy. I voted for every gasoline tax that ever came down the pike. Well, that's the wrong. That ever came before the Congress. And my opponent ran against me when I was in Congress, and he referred to me as Paul Tax on Gas, which is, so I'm very sensitive to that issue. But I'm committed every year, 3 to 5 cents for infrastructure. The other part of it is energy conservation. So you send a message to the American people, not a 50-cent gasoline tax, but a message that every year it's going to go up and cause the auto industry to build better cars, et cetera. So my commitment is just simply not rhetorical, but it is a commitment and providing for a tax that most people want to walk away from. A final comment, if I can. There are 2 words that will bring back the cities and bring back the economy. Venture capital, 4 words. Venture capital and equity capital. And if we don't walk away with a clear notion of how you bring those 2 into the American economy for young companies to grow and to exist, the rest of this is a hollow discussion, because there won't be money, all the things we're talking about, if the private sector does not prosper, be competitive, and take on the Japanese and the Germans by simply building better products. Thank you.
Mayor O'Connor will now question Senator Kerry.
Senator Kerry, you've served your country well during wartime. You also understand the devastation of war. In the American cities, not just in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles, and you've been to San Diego, we have a war going on in our neighborhoods. It's the drug war. But we don't have the same sense of urgency about the loss of lives in our neighborhoods. We lose more lives in the United States in the drug war that's not being fought than the last war that we were recently successful at winning. Will you become, if you're elected president, the general on the war on drugs and give the cities direct funding to fight the war so our police officers will not be undermanned? They will have the equipment necessary. We will have the rehabilitation for our children, and we will finally make our neighborhoods safe in this country. Will you do that if you're elected president, Senator?
Yes, I will.
And how will you do that? And how will you do that? Well, let me ask a follow-up. Will you give us as much money as the Senate authorized to bail out the saving and loan industry to fight our war on drugs?
No, I won't. Let me answer your question more broadly. I do think you've used a word that is a word deserving to be applied to this particular problem, although I think one must take some care in doing it. It is not precisely a war, but it unquestionably is a national security issue. It's a national security issue in that lives are being lost. 24,000 murders in 1990, and Mayor Jackson implied earlier that perhaps as many as 60% of those as a consequence of the battle going on in the streets between gangs and others who are trafficking in drugs. It is a national security issue, and we should respond as such. I would not hesitate to use our military forces and to make them available in the cities to wage that war. I would not hesitate as well to use all available force to make certain that our children are protected from criminals and others who are preying on them in the streets. I would not hesitate as well to make certain that if a sentence is applied, that sentence stick, and that we not, as a consequence of overcrowding in the prisons, release dangerous criminals back onto the streets to merely prey on innocent victims, innocent Americans again. It seems to me that we must put a significant deterrent in place. Otherwise, those who are trafficking drugs simply will not fear our response. One of the ways that one wins war, as General Patton noted in that famous movie, is not by being prepared to die for your country, but by making certain that the other fellow understands that he may die for his. And it seems to me that we've got to be prepared to send that kind of message out, otherwise we will lose the war. I also believe that traditional methods alone will not work, that we must come prepared to intervene at a very early age. I was in Manchester not long ago, as all of us have been recently. We've become almost permanent residents in New Hampshire, and talked to the Manchester Police Department there, and an undercover agent who had recently made it bust on a crack house said, when I asked him, what can I do to help you, he said again, fully fund Head Start. He said that if you wait till a child becomes a criminal at the age of 15 or 16, you'll never be able to undo the damage, or you'll struggle to undo the damage. But if you begin as a baby, and I must say again that our government at the federal level is not organized to do that. We have almost no capacity to support the whole family, because we have organized our federal government for political reasons, not for the purpose of trying to support families as they try to hold on to their children. Back to you.
Mayor White will now ask a question of Governor Brown.
Governor Brown, I'd like to ask a question of you on behalf of a group of Americans who are not in this room. They are not a member of a political party. They are not a member of a trade union. They have no ownership in any major corporations of America. But they are clearly our future. I ask this question on behalf of the children of America. Many Clevelanders and many Americans alike believe that children over the last 12 years have been the biggest economic and social victims of the federal government's policies. It's a horrible fact that federal policies of the last decade have made American children the poorest Americans of all. Coretta Scott King recently observed that an estimated 840,000 American children of all races have slipped into poverty in the last 12 months. We desperately need, I think, as a community and as a country, to create a ray of hope. If you were elected President of the United States, how would you create a ray of hope for the children of this country so that they would know something other than poverty, desperation, and hopelessness?
I think just winning the New Hampshire primary would give a ray of hope. And I'll tell you why. I mean that quite seriously. Those children have not been neglected and abandoned by accident. As you so well pointed out, they don't have a lobbyist and they don't have corporate interests behind them, and they're not walking the halls of Capitol Hill. This whole business of injustice which you just outlined some glaring examples, is what's happening to this country. And it's happening under the authorship not only of President Bush, but that incumbent leadership across the street. That is happening. Unless we can create a counterforce to that, everything we say here won't go anywhere. I believe we have to commit ourselves to a family Bill of Rights that we're totally behind, we're going to make happen. When I say a family Bill of Rights, I mean the right of every single American to a living family wage, to a health care, to shelter, to be free from hunger, to a real education, and to be secure in their old age. That's my commitment. Now, we talk about the money. I can tell you. I mean, I came from California. We benefited from the defense buildup. A lot of wealth was created. And we know that if you spend money, as someone said, you can't beat cash with a stick. And you can talk all you want about drug problems and crime problems. It comes down to the fact that millions of people don't have a living family wage. And you have to make that happen. Specifically, for people at the bottom on welfare, I'd say take the welfare grant and make it into a voucher that you can present to a business person who can then add a salary to it and allow that person to work in the private sector. And then, of course, you have to have training and child care and a national health care system. But you can't make that happen unless we can find some way to move aside this absurd political process that is corrupted, that is paid for by those who are represented, not by those who are not. And that's why I make as the central theme here the unconcealing of the dirty little secret of what's going on over there. And that is that rampant injustice, that's what's happening. That's what Martin Luther King said. And I can't do it by myself. All of us have got to find a way to bring people back into this process that offsets this absurd game of money from the powerful to manipulate this declining minority of Americans who still vote.
Thank
That's
you,
the
Governor.
revolution that will bring with it in its wake income support, jobs, education, and health care. But it's a power question, and until the powerless have power, then all of us who are on the gravy train here are just talking in air.
Thank you, Governor. I would ask for the mayors to please keep the questions shorter so we can move along. Mayor Flynn will ask a question of Mayor Agron.
Today, the U.S. Conference of Mayors had a hearing on a shocking report entitled Hunger and Homelessness in the United States. Mr. Agron, we believe that it's a solvable problem, hunger and homelessness. The will is there, the money is not there. What would you do as President of the United States to end homelessness in America and to feed the millions of young people that go to bed each night in our cities and communities all across this country to end hunger in America?
Mayor Flynn, you, of course, have led the way in raising this issue and addressing this problem nationally, trying to shock people into the reality of what's going on in this country. Most people understand the conditions have declined, the conditions have worsened in American cities. We have 13 million children mired in poverty, 35 million Americans mired in poverty. Hunger and homelessness existed in my city as well, Irvine, California, not thought of as a poor city. The fact that these things go on in the United States of America today, that fact is a disgrace. We know how to feed people, we know how to clothe people, we know how to house people, we know how to do all those things in America's cities. We simply have to have the resources. That's why I've proposed the $25 billion out of this massive military budget that's no longer needed, that we can cut in half tomorrow. The $25 billion be earmarked for what is effectively general revenue sharing to cities and towns. When the money gets to the mayors and to the council members, I know that they will construct the programs to feed people who are hungry, to shelter people who need shelter, to build affordable housing, to rebuild our cities and towns. This has been the tradition of self-government in this country. And I call myself a liberal Democrat, a progressive Democrat, but most of all, I like to call myself a self-government Democrat, believing that the people fundamentally will do the right thing if they have the resources. You know, Washington, D.C. is probably the only city in America where grown men and women could actually step over hungry and homeless people, go into the Capitol, and pursuant to a mandate by the administration, vote to deprive the cities and towns of general revenue sharing, as was done in 1987. Deprive the cities and towns of what was then a meager $3.4 million, and 2 weeks later, vote $3.5 million for Star Wars. Isn't it time to change national priorities and begin right now?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll begin our second round of questioning with a question from, yes.
Because of the time, we're going to suggest that we have to stay with more questions. So much.
One last question. Okay. Because of the lateness of the hour, we're going to have to cancel some of the other rounds, but I will say, and will give an opportunity for anybody who has a burning question that you just have to ask one of the presidential candidates.
Mayor O'Connor does. To date, over 200,000 Americans have been diagnosed with AIDS. By the end of next year, 200,000 Americans will have died from AIDS. As President of the United States, what will you do to deal with this epidemic that is affecting Americans all across this country? I don't know who'd be the appropriate.
So that,
Governor Brown?
unlike any other country in the world, we make these people who are sick wait for several months before they're eligible for Medicaid. They have to spend down their wealth to get on supplemental Social Security. It might take 6 months. And when AIDS activists and leaders go to other conferences, they say, well, throughout the world, they say, what's going on in America? I mean, let's first heal the suffering and make sure that those who have AIDS, who have been found to be HIV positive and are experiencing the symptoms, many of which aren't even yet recognized by the Center for Disease Control, particularly in the case of women with AIDS. So there's a major commitment not yet made just to those who are suffering. And I certainly, if I'm in a position, I'm going to make that a top priority. Then secondly, there are research proposals that are very excellent in the matter of AIDS as well as other things dealing with health in this country, and they're not being funded. That's another matter. It's incredible when you're in the richest country in the world that we're not funding the scientists that are ready and willing and able to advance the cure or the vaccine for AIDS. And number three, obviously, people have to know what's going on. The President of the United States has got to take the lead and tell people exactly what's happening with respect to AIDS, how it's transmitted, keep it before the public attention, before kids start getting this horrible scourge and it spreads around even more than it's going to. So there are three specifics, and again, there's some money needed, and the only way that money is going to come is when we can shift the whole political commitment of this country to caring about people, to caring about families, to caring about helping those who don't have the representation that all of us have because we're here tonight.
To be fair, I have to give any other candidate an opportunity.
Mayor, let me sort of become an insurance salesman at the moment. I'm somewhat at risk because I've worked on a national health insurance proposal for the last 3 years, and I've introduced it in July, and it calls for very specific federal taxes in no small number as well. It is called Health USA, and let me sell it to you briefly. It eliminates the requirement for cities to pay for indigent care. It is 87% funded by the federal government. It is 13% funded by the state government. It is not managed by the federal government. It's managed either at the state level or perhaps even further down at the local level, depending upon what the people in the states decide they want to do. It nationalized the problem of AIDS so that payment is made. You will not be making payment for AIDS out of your property taxes. It provides $27 billion worth of property tax relief, and I urge you or your fiscal officers to examine this piece of legislation. Because you will save money in 3 ways. If you're running health care clinics right now, you'll drop that item from your budget. If you are providing health care benefits for your employees in excess of 4% of your payroll, you will save that differential. Because I establish the eligibility as a consequence of being an American and break the link between eligibility and employment. And thirdly, numbers off a bit. Thirdly, if you believe that you have underserved areas, if you believe you have underserved areas in your city, this piece of legislation will bring additional resources in there because payments will be made on an equal basis. If your income is $5,000 a year or $500,000 a year, the payment to the provider is equalized. And those of you who have underserved areas will bring additional resources into your communities as a consequence of this legislation. I suspect there isn't a mayor out there that wouldn't have the opportunity either to cut taxes or to free up additional resources to put in those things that you want to spend. Again, for emphasis, it has been priced at $27 billion for the property taxes because I have a fundamental principle that underlies it, and that is this. Health care should be an expenditure of the federal and state government. It should be a requirement of the federal and state government to put together the funding and provide the income and not a requirement of the local governments.
Thank you, Senator. Last answer, Mayor.
I'd like to respond to that as well. I support national health insurance as a means of providing decent, comprehensive treatment for AIDS and all other ailments for all Americans. I have a question, though, about the wisdom of levying further taxes on the American people at a time when we still have troops stationed in Western Europe and Japan, when we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year defending societies that on their own have national health insurance programs that are better than our own. That just doesn't make sense. Let's bring those resources home and build a national health insurance system that we can be proud of. That system should also include reproductive choice, so that we take this out of the political debate and let people choose on their own pursuant to a health care system. Let me add, with respect to AIDS, Mayor Flynn, I have the greatest admiration for you, but you are wrong on the question of condoms and not making condoms available to people upon request, including teenagers. We are dealing here with a lethal epidemic, a public health calamity of unprecedented proportions. Not only must condoms be made available, but sterile needles to drug users. We have to grow up and be ready to wage this war against this public health calamity and to be prepared to win it by being honest with our kids and with ourselves and being honest about our future.
Senator Tsongas, 1 minute, please.
Since I have just a minute, I've often been accused of too many plans, but we have one on AIDS as well. It calls for an AIDS czar. The major issue is not only the treatment and the research, but the major issue is presidential leadership. Ronald Reagan could not get the word AIDS out of his mouth. Here's a man who made his living being able to communicate, but when the word AIDS started to come up, it choked. And because of that, a lot of people have died. What George Bush has done, he talks about AIDS, he compares it to cancer in the research of the two. I know what it means to have an illness that is a threat and to set up in motion a situation where people who are concerned with AIDS research see people who are concerned with cancer research as competitors is immoral. We need a president who will lead the fight against AIDS, not only for its own sake in the United States, but for all those people who have AIDS around the world. I spent 2 years in Africa. Do you realize what's happening to vast populations in Africa because of AIDS? Our responsibility is not just to ourselves, but to find the cure and the way to prevent it and take that around the world for people who at this point have no hope. That's a very deep moral responsibility, and we as Democrats are going to meet that responsibility.
Governor Clinton, do you wish to respond?
There is, after all, an AIDS Commission that has given us 2 fine reports that this president and this administration have ignored. we should begin by implementing the recommendations of the AIDS Commission. Just begin with what work has been done. I agree with Governor Brown. We must broaden the CDC guidelines for people eligible to receive treatment and do more research along the lines recommended by the AIDS Commission. Senator Kerry is absolutely right. Any comprehensive national health system will socialize the cost of AIDS, if you will, across the country in a way far fairer than what is happening now to the cities who are being bombed with it. And finally, let me say, in partial but not total support of what Mayor Agron said, I have fought this battle of putting school-based health services in. I have faded the heat of a political campaign. I have been accused of promoting immorality among young people. And I'm telling you, you need to put health education and health services into the schools to save these children's lives. And if there's a problem and the local school board or a committee of citizens have the guts to do it and they decide they want to distribute condoms, you ought to let them do it. That's my position.
The very, very last question. As we must draw this program to an end, we'll go to Mayor O'Connor.
Very brief. It's a simple yes or no answer. If nominated for the presidency, would you seriously, to all candidates, give serious consideration to selecting a mayor as your vice presidential running mate? Yes or no?
Yes.
I commit to you right now.
I'm pushing Flynn.
Did we leave you two alone here to discuss this? Yes.
Yes, but the yes is to a considering. That's all you've gotten so far.
Mm-hmm.
But a strong yes to that.
Are you going to make a commitment, Jerry? Give it to him.
Say yes, but I heard you say yes, I'm going to consider it. I didn't hear yes, you're going to do it. Now, maybe that's a fine point.
Mayor?
Yes.
But that's the way politics works.
Well, my answer is yes. I'd worry about the possible imbalance of two mayors running the White House and the country. But I certainly think, and this is an important point, that mayors have the unique experience of governance that ought to be part and parcel of the American fabric of governance. That's one subtle message that I'm trying to bring to bear in this campaign.
Thank
and I
you.
thank the opportunity for doing so tonight.
We are at the end of the hour. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank both panels. And finally, we have begun to focus in a major way on the specific needs of America's cities, and I think that's progress. Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Mayor White?
That concludes our coverage of this Democratic Presidential Candidates Forum from Washington, D.C. For more information on this event, you can write to the United States Conference of Mayors at 1620 I Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20006. Coming up next, it's last night's evening newscast from Moscow. Thursday, Jeffrey Sachs, professor of economics at Harvard University, is the guest on our viewer call-in program. Mr. Sachs will discuss Russia's move toward a market economy and the aid required from the United States to make the transformation. Phone in with your questions and comments Thursday beginning at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up next, we bring you last night's evening newscast called News One from Moscow. Each night, the program is beamed throughout the now independent states of the former Soviet Union, providing its people a number of news, sports, and weather stories. We now bring you a recording of last night's program.
This is the evening news from Moscow. Simultaneous interpretation from the Russian by John Glad. The program is entitled News One. The miners have decided not to conduct a general strike, but there is still a strike condition in some regions in Georgia,